Crusty Bob's Vintage Flatulence is in and or on the air.
So in the 7th grade, my teacher, I think it was my English teacher, Mr. David Knight, called me up to his desk for a little mano a mano, a little man on man, as I guess everybody else hunched over at their desk, involved in writing out some principle of English. He had me sit down next to the desk. Bobby, I think they still called me Bobby in school then. Bobby, do you know what the word sarcasm means? I don't remember what I said. Probably kind of shook my head a little bit. But years later, I realized, of course, the answer to that should have been when he said, Bobby, do you know what the word sarcasm means? I should have looked up and said, no, but I'll bet you're going to tell me. That didn't happen. But it probably began a long downhill slide with English teachers, culminating in my senior year in high school. Mr. Dayton was his name, teacher of English. And I had actually been the previous year, at the end of the 11th grade, selected for the, it's kind of like a National Honor Society type thing. California had something called California Scholastic Federation, CSF, and you got selected for that. And I was like, oh, groovy, he gets good grades. Well, my senior year, the following year after getting selected for that, my first semester in English in Mr. Dayton's class, I flunked. Not like C minus or D or D minus. I got an F. You know, all I can remember was that class was a tumble of Beowulf and term paper requirements with needless footnotes typed onto little file cards and all that sort of stuff. And I think it was all, you know, I never quite got the, you know, feeling there was a message in anything that they were conveying to me. But Mr. Dayton, he did not ask me if I knew what sarcasm meant, because I am fairly certain he knew that I knew. Now, I did run into him several years later. A high school mate of mine, also a graduate of Mr. Dayton's English class, became a band director for a school in our area that we grew up in. And they were playing in one of these, I guess they call them, used to call marching band festivals or whatever. And it was at a football stadium, and the marching bands would all compete, doing what are essentially little mini halftime shows back in the days when halftime shows used to have marching bands on the field. So my buddy Mike asked me if I will read the narration for their part of the show. So I said, yeah, cool. He asked me because at the time I was a professional radio announcer, had been making my living in the business since I was 19 years old, as a disc jockey and a newscaster and what have you. So I go on up into the press booth at the junior college stadium, and sitting in there is Mr. Dayton, the guy who gave me the F, or the guy under whom I earned an F in English in the first semester of my senior year. Of course, he didn't know who I was, but I guess he was kind of like he was like the press box, you know, monitor honcho for that night. You know, make sure, you know, nobody walked off with a microphone. So he told me where to sit, and, you know, turned on the appropriate switches when it was time, and I did my narration in my professional radio announcer voice, you know, ladies and gentlemen. And when it was all over, you know, I just kind of pushed back from the microphone a little bit. Mr. Dayton looked over at me and goes, that was very good, young man. And I just looked at him politely and says, thank you. It just occurred to me right now that what I should have said to Mr. Dayton was, when he said, that was very good, young man, does that mean you're going to take back the F?